Shuhun, autumn day, inscribed at Tong Pass staging post on my way to the capital. Evening comes. Red leaves are rustling. A wine-good welcome waits at this long pavilion. Drifting clouds gather over Hua Mountain. A rain shower crosses Chong Tiao Peak. Trees color the furthest mountain ranges. The river bubbles, pursuing a distant ocean. Tomorrow I'll reach the capital, dreaming still of living as a woodsman or a fisherman. So, this is the first of two poems by Xu Hong, and they are the only two poems of his included in the anthology. I had never heard of this author from the biographical notes that appear at the end of this volume. I can see that he was basically a late mid-Tang, late Tang poet. His years, 791, 850s, basically overlap with those of Du Mu. He was not a very important person from what it says here, occupying lower middle level positions. His highest post was as prefect of Jingzhou just before his death, and he occupied a series of minor posts in the bureaucracy, having passed the examinations quite early. And it seems he was quite a sickly person. Yeah, he had to resign at least once in the past because of his poor health. So moving on to the poem itself, quite an interesting piece. The topic, from the title, one would basically think that it would be a poem about traveling, yeah, and about the sadness of traveling, the melancholy, and so on. Although it is interesting in that it's traveling to the capital instead of traveling from the capital, as is very usually the case. And this second type of traveling from the capital is the one that generally gets latched to sad and melancholy thoughts. Here, in fact, it does get slightly latched on sad thoughts as well, but not of the typical kind in a farewell poem. They are the apparent lament of Xu Hun for not being able to lead the retired life or being pulled into the world of politics. So you could say this is one of the topics of the poem, that is traveling, going to the capital, going to serve in office, and implicitly the antithesis of serving in office versus leading the egoistically satisfying but immoral private life of retirement. But I would say the main topic of the poem is not that one, in spite of the title. It's quite a descriptive poem, a landscape descriptive poem. It gives a lot of geographical locations close to the capital, mainly from the northwest area of China, already from the title, the Tong Pass staging post, which was a staging post in the intersection of three provinces in the north, I think Shanxi, Shaanxi, and I'm not sure which was the third one. I think it was maybe Hunan, perhaps. Maybe. Anyway, the main topic seems to be describing the nature, or at least the greatest landmarks in that area in autumn, yeah, with all the concurrent sad images and beautiful images of autumn scenery. Okay, let's go as usual, couplet by couplet, explaining what each line or couple of lines tells us about. First couplet. Evening comes, red leaves are rustling. A wine-good welcome waits at this long pavilion. So the first couplet clearly locates us in the pavilion, which we might imagine is another name, another way of naming the Tong Pass. That is a place where officials, people in the service of the government, might be able to rest while they were traveling to and from the government. So we get the general contextualization of an introducing couplet. We get what time of day it is. It's evening, which, remember, we've seen it in a lot of poems. before, it's the melancholy, sad part of the day because the day is declining, dwindling amidst the beauty of sunset. So it's evening, and we also get an oral element, a sound, but even though it's an oral element, it evokes a visual element as well. Red leaves are rustling. So we're meant to picture in our mind and in our ear red leaves flowing around in this evening, and that's a typical autumn beautiful sight. Against this background, a wine-good welcome waits at this long pavilion. Whoever comes to this pavilion, probably Shu Hung himself, is received with wine and a warm welcome. Yeah, a wine-good, is, slightly rustic implement for holding wine and for drinking wine, but it really conveys this simple, unadorned conviviality and rest after a long day's travel. Next couplet. Drifting clouds gather over Hua Mountain. A rain shower crosses Chong Tiao Peak. Now, as you all know, as we've said before, the second and the third couplets of a regulated poem are generally the parallelistic couplets, with antithetical parallelism between every character in the two lines, word by word or character by character out of the five. And I think this is very visual. This is very, this is retained up to a point in this translation. So we have drifting clouds versus rain shower, gathering versus crossing, Hua Mountain, Chongtiao Peak. The parallelism is, quite obvious. So we get two images of nature in the autumn that are tied with geographical landmarks. Hua Mountain is one of the five great mountains of China. It's the one that was located in the west, so therefore in Shaanxi. Chongtiao Peak, less famous, but it's also a mountain from this area. So we get both mountains and what natural phenomena are taking place around them or surrounding them. Drifting clouds gather over Hua Mountain. So we get this image, clouds gathering up, collecting on top of Hua Mountain. This could be a purely descriptive element of nature, but we should remember that drifting clouds are generally used as metaphors for scholar officials and retired officials. Scholar officials when they're traveling, or hermits when they're living in the mountains and have abandoned the world. But this image of drifting clouds really seems to convey the image of the traveler himself, of Shu Hung. The fact that it is gathering, concentrating over Hua Mountain might be a way of echoing, of evocating scholar officials going, concentrating, gathering in the capital itself. The second image is of a rain shower crossing Chongtiao Peak. Again, it could be a natural image. I imagine rain sometimes evokes the bountiness and generosity of the sovereign. Sometimes it's used in some poems with sexual overtones, which I'm pretty sure that is not the case here. But anyway, notice the craftsmanship in the parallelism of the images. So the drifting clouds is a horizontal image, because clouds move horizontally, and it's a horizontal image that coalesces into a concentration. The rain shower, on the contrary, is a vertical image. Rain falls up and down, and as opposed to the coalescing and therefore locating themselves of the clouds, the rain is crossing. It's just passing. It's not stopping. It's not coalescing into any point. So, they're two very contrastive images, two phenomena of nature that are closely related against mountains that are geographically closely related. So basically this couplet is giving us a description of nature, perhaps some overtone, some political implications, but it's basically describing the landscape around the Tong Pass and close to the capital. And it's giving us some landmarks that really locate us in that area. Third couplet, which is also parallelistic. Trees color the furthest mountain ranges. The river bubbles, pursuing a distant ocean. So here again, the third couplet is also descriptive of nature, of the autumn nature that is surrounding Shu Hung at this Tong Pass, the natural scenery of the province of Shaanxi. Here, as opposed to the previous couplet, which was focused on specific landmarks and aerial images of wind and rain, we get earthly images of mountains and rivers. Mountains and rivers are, generally used also as metaphors for the landscape in general, for nature in the abstract. And again, we get a very good contrast. Trees coloring the furthest mountain ranges. So we imagine in the background the trees, we know that their leaves are red from the first line. They're tinging all the mountains that were green during the summer months with the red of the autumn months, red-brown, I would imagine. And even as far as the eye can see, the mountains are turning reddish-brown. Probably closer by, the river is bubbling. So the image for the trees and the mountains was a color image, so visual. The image for the river is the river bubbles. So it's making noise as it flows. Yeah, pursuing a distant ocean. Again, directionality. The river flows horizontally, west-east, whereas the mountains rise, and the trees on them presumably rise vertically. But anyway, what we get is a very picturesque landscape of red mountains and an ongoing river flowing on and on. Again, perhaps the images are also meant to imply or to contain some overtones, perhaps the mobility of the river connected to the mobility of the poet. And the coloring of the trees, perhaps the aging of the poet. I don't know. This is just wild speculation. Finally, the last couplet moves us away from that descriptive landscapey framework with which we were working, at least in couplets 2 and 3. It seems to be or to represent the thoughts of the poet on the next stage after this wine-girt welcome and stop at Tong Pass. He is going to the capital. The last couplet reminds us this and tells us about Shu Hun's apparent feelings at this. Tomorrow I'll reach the capital, dreaming still of living as a woodsman or a fisherman. So tomorrow the capital will be reached, but Shu Hun is still in a daze. He seems to be not completely with his heart on the idea of going to the capital to serve in government. At least he is politely pretending not to be too enthusiastic about serving in office. He seems to be saying that he's still lamenting the passing away of his dream, of his fantasy, of not serving in office, of leaving power and politics and living the quiet life of a woodsman or a fisherman, the life of the hermit or the retired scholar official. Probably, this is just empty talk. I mean, if where's the pork? If you go to the capital to serve, you've clearly decided that serving is more important than living that idyllic, bucolic, retired life. But, it's anyway an interesting way to conclude the poem, even if it's, not probably too sincere. There's this idea of, I still live in the dream of enjoying the peace of mind, the pastoral scenery and life from which I have come, and which is still perhaps present in the way that I so lavishly describe the natural landscape as I approach the capital. But this is ending. The landscape, the rural area, I'm going to the capital, to office, to power, to serve. So, interesting poem. I think it's rather well crafted, or at least its craftiness is well reflected in the translation.